Here's Video Game Sophistry. Your one-stop shop for video games, news, reviews.
Oh my god, he just ran in.
And time-wasting fun.
Hi, I'm Andy from Video Game Sophistry. We have Harvey Smith here from Arkane Studios. How are you today, Harvey?
Hey, Andy. Great. Calling from Austin, Texas. It's very good to talk to you.
Absolutely. And today we are talking about the most anticipated game of 2012, a game I think I've seen every screenshot, video, or article about, Dishonored. Now, for the 4 people in the world who don't know, tell us a little bit about the game.
Well, first of all, that's really flattering. It feels like we've come out of nowhere because this is a brand new IP.
Mm-hmm.
So Dishonored is competing with, all of these games that have a 3 or 4 behind their name. And this is the first in the series, so it's completely novel. In the game, you play a supernatural assassin in a steampunk city. So many games are set in, modern LA robbing a bank,
Mm-hmm.
or in some sort of elves and dragons land, or some sort of sci-fi soldiers fighting aliens, or modern military conflict. And that's one of the things we're happiest about, is we've created a world from whole cloth, largely, that is, I guess, influenced heavily by the Victorian period, American whaling cities, or London in the 1850s.
Now, in terms of the narrative, what does Dishonored offer? Who are we going to be playing as?
Well, you play the role of Corvo Attano, who is the royal protector. He's the bodyguard to the Empress. And you get falsely accused of killing the Empress, of her murder. We wanted to choose really a classic story like that, because so many of the elements in the game are very unfamiliar, so we needed something, to hook you. But then what's really important to us is that the way the game's mechanics work, the minute-to-minute story that you tell yourself as you play, from your actions, you can do so many things that's so nonlinear. It just forms a narrative in your head. We have a term, the embedded narrative, which is basically the story, your Corvo Attano, bodyguard to the Empress, and the emergent narrative, which is like, I leaned out, I knocked a bottle over, a guard heard it, he came to check out what had made the sound, and I possessed a rat and slipped away under the table.
It's a very unique sentiment that I don't think you could hear described about any other game.
Yeah, it's a cool combination of odd things, but
Mm-hmm.
what's most important at the end of the day is, the player's experience for us.
Back to the protagonist, Corvo. Is he going to be a silent hero on a lone journey, or is there going to be some help along the way to help us get revenge?
Well, we debated that back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
whether we should give him a very strong personality and voice, or keep him silent and let the player sort of project onto him. It happens in games sometimes. If you have a protagonist that's very strong, with a very distinct personality, then that might be at odds with what the player feels at a given moment, or how the player reacts to something.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of went with a blank slate for Corvo. He's the strong, silent type. He does have allies along the way who react to the way he behaves in the world, and whether he plays very dark or more surgical, more stabilizing. And so there's a big cast of characters. You might have heard some of the actor announcements recently.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about the star-studded cast that's coming to Dishonored?
Yeah, this is kind of a new thing for me, but I've never worked with actors like this. I went to LA several times for a week or 2 weeks at a time. I think one time was 3 weeks. And we worked with Blindlight, trying to get the cast that we wanted. And it's kind of amazing. We always work with good actors, but we've got good actors who are also amazing, names. Like Susan Sarandon, the Academy Award winner, plays Granny Rags, a character in our world. And Brad Dourif, who played Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, he's a character called Piero Joplin. He's like a natural philosopher and inventor. We have Chloe Grace Moretz, who was she plays the character Emily Caldwin,
Mm-hmm.
and she was Hit Girl in Kick-Ass. She's done a lot of good stuff. So we just have all of these people. We have John Slattery from Mad Men, who plays Roger in Mad Men. All these guys were great. They're great to work with. Really talented people who are doing something new for them. They've all done a lot of movie or stage work, and for them, when they would often read a line in the booth, and then we would cue them up for the next line, and they would read the line, and it was contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd read another line, and it was contradictory to that one. And they would stop us at some point, a couple of guys, and, hey, I don't understand. I thought earlier that we established that he was angry about this, and now he's saying you did the right thing. And we'd have to explain, like, hey, think about it. Like, this is based on what the player does, so your character is going to react one way or the other or a third way based on what the player does. And, so it was fun and new for I don't think Susan Sarandon had done a game before, so we were her first, and she was when I was a kid, she was one of my heroes because of the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
So
very unique experience getting to see them and them working on your actual product.
Oh, it was great, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of that, do you think personally that when you incorporate this Hollywood talent, it legitimizes an industry that already should be legitimized, but maybe not in some consumers' eyes? Do you think there's a component of that when you add in these well-established names?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot with friends in the industry about legitimacy, artistic legitimacy. Already video games are ubiquitous, and already they make a lot of money, but right now they're kind of on the edge of, like, where comic books are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There are some amazing comic books. Like if you read Alison Bechdel's Fun Home or Mouse or, there's some amazing Optic Nerve. There are amazing comics about relationships and about, Fun Home is about the death of a woman's father and his coming out. Comic books aren't just superheroes. They're capable of a very high and low cultural range, just like movies, just like books. And so far, we have games that are mostly about action.
Absolutely.
Right? They're not perceived yet to be capable of doing something, War and Peace, the game, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so maybe that helps. Working with Carrie Fisher, working with a member from Mad Men. I don't know. I think more than anything, what games need to do to legitimize themselves is continue tackling more interesting subject matter and broadening in that sense, broadening the number of people playing and the number of types of people playing, and broadening the number of different types of subject matter and what we're modeling in games. Because right now we model running and jumping and shooting pretty well, but we don't model like falling in love or not,
Mm-hmm.
very well. So that's all. But I'm an optimist. I'm very confident, and I love games, and I love where games are going. Like, honestly,
without question, yeah.
There was an art history class I took where we talked about photography, and from the minute people started taking photos to when photography was considered an art was about 100 years. Mm-hmm. And so I think games are actually ahead of the curve in that thing.
Where do you see Dishonored in the spectrum of these sort of games? Where does it land between the art house games that kind of deal with that specific niche to the more high end, and I guess that's almost a derivative term. I don't mean high end like that, but just the more big budget games, if you will.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because Dishonored is definitely on one level a kick-ass action game where you play
Absolutely.
a supernatural assassin in a very dark world, and you can stop time and possess people and cut throats and shatter doors and all. You're that character. But at the same time, at Arkane, we truly are into doing more, right? So it's not a linear game. It's not a scripted game. It's a bunch of systems working. You can play the way you want, and this is a game about an assassin where you can literally avoid killing anyone.
Mm-hmm.
So when we tell people that this is a game about an assassin where you can avoid killing anyone, they always ask, like, are you sure? Anybody? Like, surely not the main targets. Yes, even the main targets.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we set out as a goal, we settled on it about halfway through the game, to track how violent the player was being, and then stabilize or destabilize the world based on that. And so you can wreck everything and kill anyone you encounter, or you can avoid killing innocents, or you can avoid killing anyone. And then you end up with a world that is, the government's more stable, things are a little nicer. And so that's only one part of our sort of like, ambitious is I guess the word for Dishonored, because it simultaneously tries to like have a foot in both areas, right, in both camps.
Yeah, that choice of being able to actually manipulate the world in a way where you don't kill anyone, and then not only getting the satisfaction of doing that, but then seeing the actual effects within the world is something that very few games can do in any sort of level, let alone make it a continuous theme. And I think that is one of the biggest draws from talking to different gamers and talking about Dishonored for a very long time. That seems to be one of the biggest reasons why everyone's so excited. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, for sure. I
Hmm.
think play it your way, or like choices and consequences. Those are different ways of summing up some of the same things. Like, most games I think have gotten increasingly sort of conservative.
Hmm.
Like they're a little more filmic. You go down a street and there's nowhere else you can go. You can't go down the alley. You can't go over the rooftops. And at the end of the street, there's an encounter, and it can only happen one way, and only when the monster is dead or
Yeah.
the soldiers or whatever, a helicopter lands, then you can leave. And that's very linear. That's very scripted. That is not leveraging the best qualities of video games, which are the interactive systems, right? So what we tried to do with Dishonored, and this is I think we care more about this artistically than the subject matter or any of that other stuff.
Hmm.
Like the systems are there where you can go down the street, go around behind the street, go over the rooftops, climb through the window, possess a fish and swim through the river. And then when you get to the end where there's a combat encounter, you can slip past it without them ever knowing you if you manipulate the stealth mechanics.
Hmm.
You can stop time and slip past, or you can fight them. You can do, or there are even story-based alternative resolutions instead of killing the key assassination targets in the game.
Hmm.
So, like, it's that we care very much about that possibility space, about giving the player a bunch of options and then letting the player sort of tell his or her own story.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the universe Corvo, is going to be leaping and jumping and murdering in?
Yeah, it's so funny, the Dishonored universe. When we started the project, we thought we were making London 1666, the year of the Great Fire and the last year of the plague.
Hmm.
And we were pursuing that for a while, and we kept tweaking it and modernizing it and moving it closer to the 1800s and adding weird elements like Tesla-like security systems of powerful electricity, and we get more and more into the Victorian thing, talking about natural philosophers and all the concepts that were exploding at the time. And we also started talking about the whaling industry and bringing in, whale oil as a main source, which how cruel does that sound, to our
Hmm.
modern sensibilities? Anyway, we kept doing that and doing that, stirring it all. And one day we realized we're not actually on Earth anymore, so we should just admit that and draw like a continental map, and decide what world we want this in. And so one day we drew this, imagine a planet with a vast hostile ocean and a tiny chain of islands where all the civilization is concentrated, and they're kind of, they see the universe itself as hostile. They see because of this the way their relation with the ocean is,
Hmm.
and we call it the Empire of the Isles. And there are four major islands, and one is cold and snowy to the north, and with kind of like yeah, it kind of reminds me of like Russia before the revolution.
Hmm.
And then there's an island that's still cold, but it's a little gloomier. It's a little Scotland Ireland like. Then there's the island Bristol, which is where the game takes place, in a city called Dunwall, the capital city of the empire. And then to the south, there's a Mediterranean style place called Serkonos,
Hmm.
and island chains out from which there are pirates and things like that. So it's sunny down there. Anyway, we started that, and it sounds like the kind of goofy exercise you go through when you're making a fictional fantasy world, whether it's a book series or a movie or a video game. But then from there, it spiraled into all of these other things. We realized we needed a calendar. And, I had no idea, but there are many, many types of calendars. You do research on calendars, you realize that there aren't just three or four, there are tons. And
Wow.
so we came up with a calendar. Each month has 28 days. There are 13 months, and we name them things like the month of tides, the month of high cold, the month of nets, the month of seeds.
Hmm.
And so, little by little, your world begins to accrete this distinct culture and flavor. And that's where Corvo lives, and in the city of Dunwall. But the game constantly feels like the world is much larger than the actual game depicts, if you know what I mean.
Hmm. Well, yeah, just from what you explained there, sounds unbelievable. Actually, creating a culture, and it's the fortunate thing because those little bits and pieces of adding your own calendar, of adding those little details, really, really take the level of immersion and amp it up to the point where people don't even realize these small little things. They're just so immersed in the world it almost becomes natural.
Yeah, that's a funny thing that you say because we find that to be true all the time. What we find is people who through the game and maybe they're sneaking and they're lean out around a pillar because we have this lean feature and they eavesdrop on people. They listen to the characters talk. The characters are talking about this corrupt aristocrat is talking about how he profits from the plague that's gripping the city right now. But he also talks about his factory a little bit and about the whaling trade and so then you go through the game and you stop and in the between action moments you read a note or you read a book or you listen to another eavesdrop conversation or you read some graffiti on the wall. You look at things. You look at some guys on a dock, and you see a boat going by with a whale hanging from it. And anyway, long story short, you later realize that you understand much more about this world and these people than you ever would in a normal video game. Like this is just crept up on you, slowly sort of building a picture.
Again, very, very excited for that. And Dishonored is unique not only in the style and the story, but in the way players can complete each objective. You touched on it a little bit before, but can you give an example of some of the different options and styles players can bring to each different level and subsequent mission?
Well, that's one of the things we love most about the game is that each map, each mission is handcrafted with many different pathways through it, and you can just freely choose where you're going to go. You're going to get up on the roof, or like I said, swim through the river, go down the front street. But there's that, and then you have different powers, and you choose your powers. You buy them based on a rune currency. So you might play the game entirely and have different powers than I do. I might have stop time and shadow kill, which turns people to ash if you kill them when they're unaware. You might have possession and supernatural jump, and you might have enhanced your blink, right? So you can short range teleport further. So it's different for you and me on that level as well. You might have chosen a different path, and you might have chosen different powers. But then on top of that, there's constantly the choice of fighting with melee sword fighting or using your pistol or crossbow, or sneaking. You can literally never engage in combat and avoid everybody. And there's a moral axis as well. You can slaughter everyone or literally kill no one. And then on top of that, the AI itself, the guards, where they go on their patrol routes, they might decide to switch patrol routes because nobody's been in this area in a while, or warm their hands on the way by a fireplace, or stop and admire a piece of art. And that variability also changes your experience. So the point here is when you go through a mission in most games, it's exactly the same as it is for every other player. And in Dishonored, when you go through a mission, your experience is like an emergent narrative. It's different than any other player's.
Yeah, radically different in almost every sort of way. You touched on it there about kind of the moral axis. How is this measure of morality expressed in Dishonored?
Well, we have the thing called the chaos system, which tracks how many people you've killed. And it's not a punitive thing. It's not a judgment thing. It's not a good-bad thing. Because from our perspective, you've been so wronged, and the woman you love has been killed, and the kingdom is going to hell, that sometimes the right answer is to cut the right throats. Some people are irredeemable, and that's a valid approach to the game. The other way, though, is to say, I want to get out of this with as little bloodshed as possible. I want to restore order to the empire. I want to find a way to get out of the rat plague that's gripping the city, and I want to put the rightful heir on the throne and clear my name and that sort of thing. And so there's a much more elegant, stealthy way to finish the game instead of just blasting your way through everybody. And that's kind of like a system that we've put in place, and one of our favorite things about the game as well.
The elegancy and the different options of completing missions. How does that affect the overall narrative and the missions after the particular one that you may have acted very, very aggressively and killed everyone? Will that bleed into the other mission or vice versa?
Yeah, when you finish, wherever you're at in the game, whatever your chaos score is, when you go into the next mission, it loads into a high chaos or low chaos way. And in high chaos, there are more rats, pools of rats. There are very ravenous rats. I don't know if you've seen the videos.
Yeah.
Strip corpses to the bone. But there are more rats. There are more weepers, or people infected with the plague. There are slightly different dialogue lines in places and darker lines of dialogue in places. There are a few scenes that play out differently or not at all based on chaos level. And then lastly, the end games, what happens at the end of the story is different based on the chaos level.
Wonderful. Now, each world that Corvo operates in is kind of in its way its own standalone sandbox, as opposed to one massive world with everything. It's almost these small sub-worlds. Beyond the main objectives, what else can players do when they're in Dunwall?
Yeah, that's a good point. Like early on, people were reporting that it was an open world game, and it was like, no, it's a series of handcrafted missions, but each one is very nonlinear within the mission, and that allows us to radically change the location and the characters and all that. And all of them have little side content here and there, not just the player imposed stuff like how you choose to play, but also like little missions that you can take for other people, places you can explore to collect more loot, to like upgrade weapons and things like that, gadgets. And then like again, there are side quests to take that allow you to even eliminate or neutralize the main assassination targets without killing them.
From a development standpoint, is it difficult to find that line between laying the obvious ways to complete a mission and opening up to a more creative solution so you don't frustrate the players, but you also don't make it too easy for them?
Yeah, I used to try to convince myself that the kind of game that we made was no more difficult than anybody else's game. I've spoken at the Game Developers Conference and in Montreal a couple of times at different conferences about this type of game, and I remember being asked by audience members, but like, isn't it harder? Aren't there more variables? Aren't you doing more content?
Yeah.
And I remember trying to defend that. No, it's trust me, do it this way. It's not more work, but it really is more work, and it's much harder to balance. If you look at a game like Skyrim or Fallout or Dishonored, like these games like allow the player to play different ways, and they're very different games, the three that I just named, but like there is a ton more work and balancing to make that work than a very linear scripted experience.
So within Dishonored, if you make this sort of choice initially to have a very chaotic start to the game, you're killing people, you don't really care, but you want to drastically change your outlook and way of playing for the subsequent missions and levels, do you have that ability?
Yeah, you can recover from one state or the other by working really hard. So if you play to some point in the game and radically change your style, the game will react to that. You're not committed to, from the first minute, you're not committed to one path or the other. And also, it's not true that you can stay on one path and at the last minute switch to the other.
Yeah. Well, that's good because unfortunately, a lot of RPGs kind of suffer from that of choosing 3 or 4 different options right at the end that don't really, convey that level of immersion that maybe you were trying to in the 30 or 40 hours beforehand.
You're right. Our chaos system is a lot more organic and is the aggregate of what you've done all along the way. I was also the lead designer of Deus Ex, and unfortunately, we did the thing where, I love Deus Ex, obviously, but we did the thing where at near the very last mission,
the boxes,
game, and then like in the final mission, make your decision about which of the 3 or 4 end games you wanted to trigger. Dishonored does not work that way.
Very good to know. Now, in terms of, we did talk about hours for a second there. What will the average player versus the completionist player look at in terms of Dishonored to finish it off?
Well, it's weird. Only 2 games in my personal career of 18 years have had this weird trait, but Dishonored and Deus Ex were both games where there was a big variance between the very direct player and the player who spends a lot of time and explores. And so for Dishonored, I would say that in our experience, we've had lots and lots of people play the game. The very direct players who just go complete the missions, it takes them about 12 hours. But the people who explore, eavesdrop, read notes, like do the side content, those people, it takes about 24 hours to finish the game.
In terms of who you'll be fighting, now I know at Gamescom you released a little information about some new, very interesting units that kind of possessed their own paranormal abilities. Can you tell us who Corvo will be attacking and some of the different enemy types?
Well, very often Corvo is pitted against the City Watch, the Dunwall City Watch, and there are several different classes of enemy within the City Watch, from lower guard to common guardsmen to the elite guard, the officers armed with pistols, and then there are also the tall boys, which are like guards given a kind of numbing agent to like soothe out their empathy.
Mm-hmm.
So they walk around on these enormous stilts firing these incendiary arrows, burning up people with the plague, and also because they're on stilts, they're staying above the plague. And then there's also a religious faction called the Abbey of the Everyman, and the members of the religion are called overseers. Some of them have strange mathematical music devices that play particular tones that cancel out supernatural effects.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be one of the things you were alluding to.
Yeah.
In addition to that, there's an acidic mollusk around the water in the river called the river crust. There are dogs. There are rats, hordes of rats. There are gangs throughout the city. So there's the Bottle Street Gang is one of the gangs you'll face, and there's a group called the Whalers that are take rubber suits from or leather suits from a whale slaughterhouse, and the gas mask, the rebreather mask that the people working in the slaughterhouse used to use before it all fell apart, before the city got dilapidated, and they wear those suits, and you'll face those guys as well. So there's a colorful cast of characters that are somewhat Victorian and somewhat unique to the world of Dishonored.
Absolutely. Now, you've had the chance to see a lot of players play the game, creating it with this kind of open concept. What are the different styles that players will usually go through? Does it stick to one or two, or do you find a real eclectic mix of how new players approach each mission and level?
Well, it's funny watching people play over and over, because often in a given street or situation, they'll be like, I know the 4 or 5 things people commonly do.
Mm-hmm.
But people always surprise us with Dishonored. Somebody always figures something out that we didn't think of before. We were watching somebody play, and he was on the roof or balcony of a 4 or 5-story building. Normally, jumping to the street would have hurt him or caused damage, but he had the possession power, so he jumped and in midair possessed the woman walking the street below. And because of the way possession works in our world, you don't leave your body behind. You physically merge with the target. Mm-hmm. It breaks the fall, basically. So this guy had figured out an emergent tactic where he could jump off the building and merge with this possession target on the way down and not take any damage, just continue down the street. And so people do things all the time that we just haven't seen. And in terms of playthrough, a lot of people focus on the all-out combat or the all-out stealth. Some people go non-lethal. Some people are really hardcore in the stealth community. They want what's called ghost to levels.
Yeah. Which
just means like no one ever alerted to the fact that they were there.
Mm-hmm.
So some people do ghosts lethally and some people do ghosts non-lethally. But like the AI literally never tripped into the state where it saw you and said, "Aha, there you are." And that's way harder. If you play our game on the 4th difficulty tier and you try to ghost the game and you try to play non-lethally, a lot of weird, cool stuff happens. You have to get creative. It's like, not everybody. This is not for everybody, of course, but it's a sublime experience because you really are constrained. And then people also do weird playthroughs too, where I feel like the game is even better on the 2nd or 3rd playthrough. But we have people doing things where, like, one time they play one way, the next time they play the other way. They only take possession as a power. They try to use that, or they only take bend time as a power, or they only take passive powers. They don't take any powers except blink, which you get for free near the beginning of the game. Mm-hmm. They try to that's called the flesh and steel playthrough, and so we have people experimenting and trying, expressing themselves through the systems.
Personally, what is your sort of favorite moment within the game, either playing it or watching someone else play it?
Yeah, that's a hard question. Rafael Colantonio and I talk about this all the time, though. He's the co-creative director of the game and loves this type of game as much as I do. And, we've seen people do things like there's a duel in the game where a guy challenges you to a duel, and you step on the mark and turn your back to the other duelist. He turns his back. Some people are watching you. and they count to 3, and on 3 you're supposed to turn, stay in that spot, and shoot the guy.
Yeah.
But we've seen people do things like freeze time right as the countdown gets to 0, and it's time to shoot. They'll freeze time, and then they'll run over and possess the guy, the other shooter, the other duelist, and they stop time just as he fired his gun, so the bullet's hanging in the air, and they'll walk him with possession inside of him. They'll walk him around in front of the bullet, and then they'll go back to their own mark. So when time resumes, the bullet hits the guy that fired it, and it's sort of like a weird unintentional suicide. And I just love the fact that you can do things like that in our game.
Yeah, it does sound absolutely unbelievable. Finally, last question. Thank you again for taking so much time to talk to me. I really do appreciate it. Why should players pick up Dishonored?
Well, I think Dishonored is a novel setting and a gorgeous, gorgeous art style. Victor Antonov, who was the art director of Half-Life 2, was our visual design director, and Sebastian Mitton is our art director. Those two work in tandem, and I love the look of the game, the non-photorealistic look of the game. The audio direction of the game is completely atmospheric and chilling, I think. And the level design is non-linear. You know, you choose your own path, and there's just constantly decisions to make about the powers and your approach to the game. And I guess there's so many things that I love about this game. I love this game more than any game certainly I've worked on in many, many years. And Raph and I especially are really psyched about the way it came out. But, you know, there's the aesthetics of the content, the art and the sound and the levels. But there's also the choices that you make, and you know, as you play through, you kind of do things your way. And that's really the strength of the medium. That's really what games should be about. You know, if I had to sum it up in a short way, I would say you can play improvisationally, which should be the litmus test, I think, for games. And you know, it's certainly a part of Dishonored, and one of the things that I think is best about it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for talking to us. I'm Andy Borkowski for Video Game Sophistry with Harvey Smith from Arkane talking about Dishonored. It's going to be Game of the Year without question. When is it hitting store shelves and for what systems?
Dishonored comes out October 11th in Canada, I think. I think it's October 9th in the U.S. and October 12th in Europe. So it's somewhere between the 9th and the 12th of October this year. And it's for PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. For the PC, you can get it on Steam, or you can get it Games for Windows, but not Games for Windows Live.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Harvey. I'm Andy Borkowski. You have a great day.